Tired of your current job? You want to start your own business? Well, you're in luck. Jamie Lee is hosting So You Want to Start a Business, where every Saturday he interviews actual business owners and they'll share their journeys. They'll give you valuable tips and strategies on how to start and grow your own business. Let's see who Jamie has in store for us today on So You Want to Start a Business.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of So You Want to Start a Business. It's been a little while since I've been back here, so we got a good one for you coming in. So today we have Hillary Johns. Welcome, Hillary.
Oh, thank you, Jamie Lee. I appreciate it. I thank you so much for having me.
I brought Hillary on because she is a lawyer, and I know that one of the big things that people, or at least me, whenever I always thought about starting a business, was the idea of, if I don't get all of my ducks in a row, legal-wise, I'm going to get myself in trouble or something like that. So, Hillary, welcome, and can you please tell yourself a little bit about you and about your law practice?
Sure. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm based in California, but I'm also licensed in D.C., New York, and Montana, the great state of Montana. So we handle matters in all 4 states. I'm primarily a trial lawyer, and we practice in the areas of business law, employment law, intellectual property, entertainment law, and we do some real estate on occasion.
Right. So speaking of that, as far as getting started in a business and stuff like that, it can be a scary thing, and you want to make sure that you are protected. What do you believe is a good game plan in getting organized and planning on starting a business when it comes to legal issues?
Well, first, I think it's really important to have good people around you and people who are advising you, because no one does it alone. I think a good starting point is to get a list of what you have to do, what can wait, and what would be nice but aren't priorities. And things, for example, legally, what form is your business going to take? Are you going to be a sole proprietor? Are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a corporation or partnership? What steps do you need to take to do that? Have you talked to a tax planner or tax preparer, an accountant, or an attorney who can, Cat Trigger is also making this appearance, who can advise you on what would be beneficial for you? For example, you might want to try your business for a few years in a certain form to make sure it's profitable. If you're going to form a company, such as an LLC, which they have in California, they also have LLPs and corporations, they're classic ones. You need to make sure that makes financial sense for you and that you're observing what are called corporate formalities. Do you have your business license? Do you have your EIN number? Are you registered with the Secretary of State? Are you doing, for example, if there's a lot of people are e-commerce these days. A lot of people provide services online. Are you going to have to qualify in more than one state, and what do you need to do? So if it's, say, for example, if someone were to come into California or New York, they have to register as a foreign business doing business in that state. And they're foreign because they're not, for example, I'm a native Californian, but I do a lot of business in New York. That's probably my second home. So as a California business going into New York, you're going to have to register there. If you went into Indiana or Texas, you're going to have to observe their formalities. It's likely going to require a set of tax returns, for example, and you need to think about those things. And you need to think about record keeping. Extremely, extremely important. Keep your records, keep your bank statements, all paper is important, things like that. And how you're going to do that in a budget. Because
Speaking of that, what do you think the biggest considerations, as far as, especially whenever you do your taxes and stuff like that, as far as being a sole proprietorship versus being an LLC?
Well, I think one of the things is, does it really make sense? Because if you're a sole proprietor, all income is going to pass through. I've seen businesses that have gone on for decades. They started out as a sole proprietor and they grew, and they just never made it into a company. It may not make sense to do that tax-wise. It may make sense to do it that way. And again, an accountant can better advise you because we don't give tax advice, but I would say there's often the difference there, because some people are like, oh, I'm just starting an LLC. I'm like, well, did you talk to a tax accountant? Did you talk to a tax attorney or an accountant about whether that made sense? Now you have 2 sets of tax returns. Are you going to be able to do that? And so I think those are the primary considerations. It really is a myth that if you form an LLC, it's a separate entity, and if you do anything, you won't get the LLC will get sued. And I see a lot of these people that go, well, there's no money in the company, whatever it is I have. and so I'm not going to get sued. There's a thing called piercing the corporate veil. So that is not true. So you often have what are called a single member or two member LLC, and if they're running that company, they can likely get sued because they're treating it as their own, or they didn't properly capitalize it. So it is not always true that if you have a company and it goes belly up or whatever happens, or it doesn't work out, or you get sued, that the individual won't get sued. Another point I think that everyone should consider is business insurance is surprisingly affordable. Get business insurance. Get it for defamation and media coverage too. They do have that. Look on your policy. If you have a homeowner's policy or a renter's insurance, they may have it too. Because in this day and age, everybody, I mean, we're online right now, so you have those things to think about. They are, and I think when people look at it, they go, well, we're not a big company. We're just starting. We don't have that. And I think it's surprising to a lot of people. Oh, I can afford this. This is not huge. I mean, there are some what we call startup costs, but I've seen people on really skimpy budgets be very, very successful. You know, they watch their money, but they have clients or they have customers or whatever they're doing. So you don't have to go broke starting a business. I mean, you have to think about what your options are, and you know, maybe something later you go, you know, we can't afford that now, but maybe that's a goal for our business to have that. But insurance, you'll sleep at it. You really will.
Besides that, do you see any other common misconceptions that business owners have whenever they come to start their business?
I do. I think with employees and independent contractors, that's a big one these days. That is, you often see, you know, are they working more, depending on your state, the threshold number of hours to qualify as an employee. And I think a lot of people, I often hear, we do a lot of employment law, we do employer defense, and I hear a lot of, well, we were just starting, so we didn't really do all that. You know, we didn't really have, we just paid them whatever we did, and it wasn't really in writing. You know, there are legal plans like Rocket Lawyers. When I'm not, you know, plugging anybody here. It's not my intention. That's when they have several that they have forms online where you can at least have something. You should have a written employment agreement. You should have written agreements, but you should have a company policy. You should be aware. You can find this online, and you know, you can get, frankly, free legal advice for a lot of these about sexual harassment, things like that, what you can and can't do. Because a lot of the time, I think things happen in life, but they always do, and it throws someone into a panic, and they don't know what to do, and they haven't planned for it. And I think, you know, it really is true. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. There's something to that. Not always, and you can't plan for every contingency. And the opposite extreme is people overplan. If it's not in their plan, they don't know what to do. And so, right. But I think that careful planning and thinking about it, you think about it, bank accounts, a license, insurance, our employees, how are they being paid, records, you know, if there's problems, if they complain, things like that, how are customers dealt with, depending on what, if you're providing service, or maybe you're providing video, or maybe you're providing goods, you're shipping something e-commerce, maybe you have pet supplies, or you're selling, you know, the shirts like that we're wearing, you know, and, you know, something like that. You need to have a way to keep track of that. And having a system like that is time consuming up front. A lot of the work is done up front, but once you do it, you'll feel more comfortable with it, I think, because it's, you know, and I think one thing I would have learned, and I learned from being a lawyer, is everybody gets into scrapes now. They just do. It's part of life. So don't expect it doesn't mean you failed if everything goes something goes wrong, because you know it really doesn't, and it shouldn't be emotionally scarring. You can learn from it. You know, no one's going to die. You always have your health, but you know you just need to learn about those things as you go. I mean, there's certain things in life. I think we both fairly say, and everybody listening can fairly say, there are things in life I learned from that, and I think a lot of that is doing that. So getting good advice, maybe a friend to go, or if there's good online resources, like most these days for employment law, you know, wage and hours, things like that. Most states, I think all states now, have good websites with some descriptions, which is a free service, and they tell you, you know, this is what you're required to do, so that if you're not wondering, like,
when you talk about going to each state has stuff on their website, is there a specific office? Because I think that, like I said in one of my Wednesday episodes, as far as free legal advice, I went to Marquette University. Actually has a program for Wisconsin to where law students are able to kind of confer with you. It's almost like an internship kind of with another lawyer kind of overseeing them, but it is a way of getting free legal advice. And I think that during that time, they were talking about a lot of because I was looking at kind of doing some credit repair and stuff like that, and they were talking about and the part of, like you had said before, of knowing what each state requires. They kind of talked about the Secretary of State website or something like that around that area. Is there a place or an idea of the best place for each state to find an idea of a generalized or kind of better formatted? Because I find, the reason I say is because I've kind of looked around some, and sometimes it's like you got to go here and there, and you get a little bit on a rat chase.
I think that's still the case in most cases. I know, for example, New York has several different websites you can go to, even get your license. California has the Department of Labor. Every state has state rules regarding the employment law and sexual harassment. So, for example, wage and hour claims, what breaks are you required to do? What is your state's minimum wage? There should be a government website, not a private website. I'm not saying they're not accurate, but you go to the government's website. Each one should have one. California's is very detailed. New York's is very detailed. Other states may not be as detailed, but they will have the basic information there. So it depends. Each one of them, they have the New York Human Rights Commission, Office of Human Rights, and things like that. They have different names for them sometimes. Mm-hmm. But if you look in, but California is the I think it's dir.ca.gov. You can go to there and look at their label. But they should have everything you need there. If you're talking about a formation as to the business, that's for labor laws. If you're talking about a formation as to an entity, the Secretary of State for each state should have that, because that's where you register your business online. Your license is a separate matter. That's usually with, depending if, for example, I'm a lawyer, so I'm licensed with the state of California, DC, Montana, New York, but most businesses only require a local license unless they're conducting business somewhere else. So you might always check the county. You should also check the city that you're in. And in addition, you should also check if you're doing business in more than one city, do you need a license there as well?
I got lucky. I only do my business at home, so I didn't need a license. Nobody visits me at home, so I'm good, according to my city. So speaking of things like with Marquette and stuff, do you recommend, since I like them because they were pretty straightforward, especially with sometimes with a student, you get somebody who kind of says it a little bit better where I can understand it, I guess you can say. But what's the best way of getting, for somebody that doesn't have a lot of capital or something like that, to be able to get that free advice? I know you were talking about the one website or something like that. What would you recommend for somebody on a low budget getting started?
They have several websites. SHRM has good websites. They have a subscription and they have free ones. They talk about employment law, formation, changes in the law, things like that. And often a lot of these sites have newsletters. So if there's a change in the law, they will have that. They'll send you, sign up for a newsletter, and then these days almost everyone has one. They send it out and they say, hey, and they advise you of those. It would depend as to what area. With tax, I would be careful. I would make sure that you have the right information. So if they don't have that information, then you're going to have to go, again, make sure that it's a government site that's giving you this. I'm not saying they're not correct, but I've seen some of them, for example, that are outdated, or current, or they may have a certain interpretation, or they may be wrong. Lawyers are usually a good source of information too, if you know one, or if you have a friend who's one, or there's often agencies like you're mentioning that will give legal advice to you. Remember that law school students aren't lawyers. They're studying to become lawyers, but and they may not have as much knowledge as, say, a 30 or 40-year attorney. They're just not going to know as much. But that doesn't mean they can't be very insightful and help you. And if they go to a clinic or a lot of those places, that's also a good way to do it too. I would say that there's often, the city's website often has a how-to on a lot of these, how to apply for your license. Or sometimes, for example, they have services that will do that for you. Some states have a requirement of publication. So if you register your name or something like that, or you have a business license, you record your business, you follow those steps. They do have services that are very low cost that you can do that too. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to cost you something, But
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's going to cost you something, but it's not going to cost you a huge amount.
Because it's funny how a lot of people will end up being, and I know that it's to protect themselves, but a lot of them will try to tell you what you need to look at, kind of, and stuff like that. But they're like, I can't give you any legal advice. You have to go to a lawyer. Of course, that's for a good purpose. You know.
Yeah, and they do, and that's right, because anybody who's not licensed in a particular state is not a lawyer. Like you notice, I've already said several times, I'm not a tax lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I can't advise you on that because again, I'm not qualified to.
Right.
I don't have that skill set.
So that's great for somebody starting out, and that's for somebody. What about whenever they want to grow to the next level or start to expand their business or something like that? What's something that a lot of business owners should really keep in mind as far as whenever their business expands? I know that, you know, if it's a brick and mortar or something like that, and they actually physically expand, it's business permits and stuff like that. But is there any other kind of legal wise that they should kind of consider whenever they start to grow?
They are. I mean, probably if there's a lot of growth, there's probably more employees. How that's going to be handled and supervised, I think a lot of people don't think about that ahead of time, and then they get into a situation they're like, oh God, I have to do all this, and you know there becomes a problem with an employee or some kind of claim, or they say you get paid or whatever it is. So I think it's important to know what the rules are up front and have written agreements and have some sort of policies in place. I do also think it's important to talk to your accountant or your tax attorney about financial planning, how that's going to look, and you have a budget, what your costs are going to be, what your taxes are going to look like, who's going to handle that, who's responsible for making sure that gets done. I would also say, if there's a lot of growth, depending on what kind of work you're doing, you know, did you invent something? Are you using software that you created? You know, do you have a logo? You know, does that need to be trademarked? You know, do you have a brand name that you're growing, you know, that needs to be protected? You know, are intellectual property considerations? Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes it just might be the individual doing it, but you know, and some words are like difficult to, you know, trademark and things like that. But that does not mean that you shouldn't be thinking about that, because maybe you have a logo or something, and then you get a call saying, "Hey, here." I would also look at your professional reputation online, and you know, think about negative reviews if there are. You know, what are people able to do that? You know, a lot of people retain services based on their reviews. They go, oh, they don't even know. They go, oh, you got a lot of good reviews, and that's great. And so you need to think about that as well, and be aware of your online presence, because the reality of life right now is that. And are you going to do online commerce? Are you going to be providing services online? Like, for example, are you going to be providing your service by Zoom? You know, if it's something like you're installing plumbing, obviously you can't. Or is it a good that you're shipping? You know, things like that. And I think if you're going to do business in more than one state, you need to be very clear about what the laws are there. Like, for example, I tried to get something shipped to me from another state, but you can't. It was a plant of some sort. They can't ship to California. I can't receive it here. You know, that's, you know, you have to check things like that. But as the service provider or the provider of goods, you need to be aware of what those laws are and make sure that you are doing that. And I would keep track of, you know, what your inventory is, how much it's going to cost. Like, for example, their computers, office equipment, health insurance to employees. Laws change in that area. Just because everybody's doing it a certain way doesn't mean that's the problem. And again, it's very doable. You just have to think through what those costs are going to be.
One of the like I said, one of the businesses that I thought about going into, and I kind of dipped my toe in a little bit, was credit repair and stuff like that. What business would you believe, or that you've seen, that has the most hoops to jump through, or you know, registrations and legal wise, that kind of makes it harder to go into that business type?
I wouldn't say those are. I mean, two that I would say are difficult are entertainment, because there's a lot of things you need to do, and securities. You know, securities type. Anytime you're dealing with someone's finances, those can be difficult because often they require specific licensing, like day trading and things like that. Anything time you're dealing with those can be difficult. I would say restaurants, you need to make sure, you know, there's always something to do. You know, there's the licensing. Do you have your liquor license? Do you have your food license? Do you have your vendor? You know, what your relationships with your vendor, your accounts, you know, current, things like that. I think that also factors into it.
Have you seen a lot of business, a lot of law changes, or that have kind of been made a lot since there's been an influx of online businesses since the pandemic and stuff like that?
I think so. I think people are more aware of what, there's more access to information. I think there's more awareness of online reputation, which is a huge thing right now, and how you present it and things like that. And, I think defamation is another one. You always have to be careful of what you say, just because you think a nasty thought, maybe it's not a good idea to share that with everybody. That may come back to bite you. So to make sure it doesn't, discretion is usually the better part of valor on that. That's what I would say.
What do you... Would you? I'd like for you to go into that a little bit more, just while the difference between defamation and freedom of speech. I know that that's the first thing that people are going to end up saying, especially whenever you start to have a lot of people that end up doing YouTube channels or something like that. What's the difference that you get First Amendment audits and everything else so much anymore? That's going to be the first thing that goes first.
Well, I can only speak to the states I'm licensed in, which is California, DC, Montana, and New York. But generally, just because there's free speech rights does not mean you can say whatever you want. It just means there may be a consequence to it. And so if you went up and said, my doctor's a thief and he's incompetent and, he did all these horrible things to me, and you post that online, you're likely going to be getting a cease and desist and retraction request. You are. You're going to, you look at some of the, you've seen some of these, if you make a comment that is going to damage a person's reputation, either professional or personal, or affect their life adversely, again, and they are a public figure, or they're a well-known business person, or they're very affluent, or things like that, or they don't want these comments being made, or they're online, what it can do to your business. Usually these days, most people know a couple negative reviews does not necessarily mean anything bad. Sometimes it can actually be more realistic, because you're saying, okay, not everybody's going to like you. But if you're getting something, they're really nasty. Like we've seen ones that people are being accused of being pedophiles. You can't just say anything you want. So again, free speech is one thing, but that's a very extreme, I'm going to do whatever I want. There may be a consequence to it. And again, if you started saying nasty things that were not true about a very reputable local doctor, for example, you're likely going to get contacted by his lawyer. And if there's damage done to their reputation, like the word pedophile, that may set people on fire. You don't know that, and you have to be careful about that, because those things can damage a person's reputation. Or say, for example, gossiping about a person and saying nasty things, and saying, for example, they're a drunk or they're a drug user or things like that. That can also get you sued for defamation. And again, truth is usually a defense, at least in the states I practice in, but that doesn't mean you get sued on the way that happens. So you may have
so more or less, it's not legal. It's not illegal. It's a civil issue at that point. You're not going to get arrested for saying it, but it's the civil side of it that's going to be hitting you.
I can't say I know, and in certain countries that defamation could be considered a criminal act.
Okay.
And as I understand it, because I did a presentation on this a while back, California is not one of those states, but there are other states, I think, I'd have to check again, because the law changes, where it is a criminal act to say something defamatory, so you can be charged. But again, other countries have also had that too. So if you defame someone, don't assume that, would a DA actually charge you? I don't know. But again, I don't know what those states are. If you'd like, I can check. But I was surprised to see that, because it said, is it a criminal act if you do that? Would they actually be prosecuted? But 125 years ago, they used to do that. You said such and such about me, and you said I was a lowdown, whatever it is. So that can be, I can't say it's not a criminal act. You can certainly be sued civilly. You're always put at risk for that. Should we be afraid to not say anything? And again, I know everybody thinks it's funny to have this quip, this truth is a complete defense, but a complete defense depends. It depends on the context, what a reasonable person would understand. That doesn't mean you might not get put through quite a bit of stress, time, and money to get to that. So sometimes it is better just to say, we're going to deal with this, not to say something.
Because I can see that a lot of big now, with so many people, like I said, with YouTube channels, people starting YouTube channels and stuff like that, that start to see a lot of the things going on, that they want to be the Howard Stern of YouTube or something like that, and be like the shock jock, or
Right.
say shocking things just to try to get views or whatever. It can still get you in trouble. You better that's as far as that being a consideration.
Yeah, Howard Stern, whether you like his work or not, is shock jock is very, very, very good at what he does. He really, really is. I mean, he's very smart. He's, and again, whether you agree with his politics or not, he usually knows where the line is. And I'm sure, I don't know I don't know him, but I do know, I'm sure that he has everything set up and is prepared and is smart and is cognizant of there are certain things you just can't do, and I'm sure he knows that. But again, mouthing off without thinking about the consequences is almost never a good idea. It may feel good when you're saying it, but later it could be a problem for you. And you're saying, "Oh, I didn't mean that." It's like, well, sorry isn't going to work here. And California, for example, Wisconsin, I don't know how it works there if that's where you live, but California's a very litigious state. There are other very litigious states. You don't want to be in that situation. So I just am careful. I would be careful about what you say. When you're in a courtroom.
I was actually surprised, whenever I was looking through different states as far as with the credit score and stuff like that, where you had to, like for instance, Georgia, you have to do any type of credit repair, you have to be a nonprofit organization. Kentucky and a lot of them, they don't have anything. Wisconsin has, you got to be bonded and register as a credit repair and stuff like that. From your experience as far as looking at that, is there a lot of things that you see that are in common that kind of shock you as far as the difference between laws in between states, I guess you could say?
I think, in looking at them as a whole, the way I look at laws, it's a living, breathing thing. So laws change depending on the political climate. Laws are a reflection of the current society. There's either federal mandates and things like that in federal law, and there's everything else is left to the states. I mean, one does not come to mind, but I know, for example, Florida, and this is not in any way criticizing Florida, some of their laws are very, very different with respect to non-competes and NDAs and proprietary information and stuff like. California is a very, very liberal state, whereas if you go to other parts of the country, that may not be the situation. But I don't recall any ones that really shocked me as to what they think. If there were laws that openly discriminate are concerning, of course, but I don't recall any off the top of my head.
Do you have any? Well, I gotta ask it. I'm originally from Kentucky, and of course Kentucky has the old law that you got to take a bath at least one time a year. What's the most, as far as old shocking or old laws, is it that you kind of got to laugh at whenever you think of it?
There was one about ownership of livestock. It was almost like homesteading livestock that I read on the books a while ago. Some very flowery writing about who owned a cow or something like that. It was surprising. It was just excuse me, never avoided and never overturned. So it just sort of sat there on the books. I'm sure there are more. If I read the books, there'd be some other ones about commentary. I wouldn't say there are any so-called laws currently, but I'm sure there are in certain states. They're called blue laws. They just never go off the books, and I don't know if they're actually enforced. Some of the obscenity laws were funny, in the 60s and things like that too, and that they had very disproportionate standards depending on who you were. But I think they were. Those are the ones I remember. I don't remember law per se, but I just remember the writing about the reasoning. But I also keep in mind that where they are in the country and what time in history it was, and things like that too, that really affect how those are done. But I'm sure there are lots of other blue laws that just the time and effort it would take to have the legislature and everything go through those when there's so many other pressing issues would be astronomical. I really do think that. I think it's not that, but there are some funny ones. You're like, oh wow, that's the use of a plow or something. Usually those are the ones that strike you as funny, just because they've been on the thing for such a long time, You're like, oh, they still have those? Wow. They're more amusing than anything else, I would say.
One of the things I'm kind of curious about is the part of the connection between federal law and state law at that point. I guess, of course, the biggest thing that you kind of see this now is with, and I'm not trying to get political at all or anything else, is with Roe versus Wade. Now with us in Wisconsin, since they've taken the federal part of protection away, now we go back to a law that was in like the 1700s or something like that. Are there a lot of times that you end up seeing stuff as far as the marrying between federal and state, where if federal ends up saying something else, that it ends up going back that they don't even think about that?
Yeah, I would think, for example, cannabis is illegal, is legal in this state, but it's in several states, but federal law doesn't recognize. So there, for example, there are banking laws and how things are regulated, and employment laws and other things like that about how those are handled. They can be very, very different because it's, federal law doesn't recognize it. Again, the voters have recognized it here. I think it's legal in Oregon. I don't know what other states it's legal in. That would be one. I would say that's very noticeable, and how you transport it and how it's grown and, how that works. So I think that's a complex process. I don't even think they have clear rules about it yet, because I think they're kind of just, learning it as they go, I would say. So that would be one that struck me as problematic in the way it's structured, and in part because federal law doesn't recognize it.
Yeah. So speaking of, we've kind of talked about a few things with business and everything. There are a whole lot of moving parts or things that, or at least to me, whenever you go into a business, still of things you got to make sure that you cover and everything based on that. What would you say to a person that's wanting to start a business, as far as to, I guess, to calm them a little bit, to say it's not as bad as you think, or do you think it's as bad as you think?
Could you repeat that? I'm just not clear what you're asking.
So in other words, if I'm starting to think of going into a business, but I'm worried about all of the laws or all the registrations and stuff that I have to do, is there anything that you could tell them, or as far as it's not as bad as you think it is, or...
Yeah, make a list, have a list, and calendar your deadlines. It will help you. Once you get used to doing it, because most people look at all the rules and regulations and they don't do it because they feel overwhelmed. Oh, excuse me, trigger just jumped on my thing. And they feel overwhelmed with all the rules and regulations and tax. Oh, I don't have to do that. Okay, I didn't know that. Make a list, learn it, and once you learn it, it won't be. It's not as it really isn't. I mean, it's a lot to do for sure. And you have to be up for that. If you're a person who doesn't like to do that detail and that there's always something to do, you might not be running your own business, might not be for you. I mean, you may want to be an employee or have a side business, but these days, if you're making money or you're spending money, you're going to have those issues. There's no way around it. And right. No one gets a free pass or a free ride. I just don't have to think about it. That's just not the way it works. So I would learn. There are a lot of resources online I would read, and I would get familiar so you kind of know what to expect on those, because I think that will help you. I do think that helps people. And if they don't do that, then I think that's where they have problems, because I think they just don't prepare for it, and they go, they don't want to deal with it.
What's the best way for my audience to support you and your business, as far as best way to contact you or to support you, whether you're in podcasts or
I appreciate that. I'm online at hillarytriallawyers.com. You're welcome to watch my podcast. You're welcome to watch my presentations. We've had some matters in the media. You're welcome to do that. Support small business owners. Support women in business. Support good men in business. And I would say, the best thing I would like everybody to do is just learn something from today. And even if they don't learn anything from me specifically, go read a resource that you think will help you with your business.
And that's why I'm here to try to get the information in for you. Yeah. And speaking of, it's funny because you mentioned, and I didn't mean to interrupt, the women in business. One of my next guests is going to be talking on that specific subject. as far as women in
Good.
business. And
Well,
stuff,
that's
so.
good to know.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a surprisingly large percentage of women in business. Men too are super. So I don't do those. I think everybody has something. But if you, what would be super if you guys just go out and find a resource online. The government, surprisingly, the governments have good. The state governments in the areas of labor law and business formation have good resources. And look and learn about it. Make a list, and it'll make it a lot easier for you. And succeed in your business. Feel good about it. Believe in yourself. That's what I would say.
And is there anything else that you think that we did not cover in this interview?
Yeah, get insurance. I know we talked about this. Call your broker. Get a good broker. Become friends with your broker. A good broker. I love my broker. My broker is just super. I recommend him to everybody, and he is so good and so nice, and he's done so much for us, because knowing you have insurance, if you get sued or anything you get cited or anything, is such a good feeling. And it was affordable. It was not, you often hear these stories like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do pay quite a bit, but it's doable, and you're like, okay, I feel good about this. I'm good with this. I'm not going to be, get someone who's good to help you like this. Get a support system. I mean, really have insurance people you can call, have vendors you can call, have, know your transportation, people like that, and appreciate them, because if you do, it is nice.
I guess that was going to be my last question, but I do have one other. Do you recommend, speaking of that, and I think we covered it a little bit, but like I said, people kind of have the idea that an LLC is going to protect them. Do you recommend, or do you think that as far as insurance compared to going to an LLC, what's the best way, or that you're thinking of as far as to protect yourself, the insurance side of things?
I don't think it matters too much, because what I would recommend if you had an LLC or another corporation or company is that the individuals within the company also be insured. So,
okay.
You have to make sure that they're insured as well. If you want to add an extra layer of protection, but you could be realistically just adding another defendant there. But it is a good idea to be fully insured. But I know a lot of people, like, for example, a classic one is they sell real estate. So they buy real estate, they form an LLC, they put it in the LLC, and then they sell it. And they think they get sued for failure to disclose, that there's a structural problem or something like that, that they're going to be protected, and they're not. They will get sued individually. So those, I think, are important.
Great. Awesome to have you here. Viewers, if you made it this far, hopefully you have. We're going to have Hillary give us another little deep dive training for our Wednesday episode, so make sure you take care of, come back and view that too. So with that, I appreciate your time, Hillary, and thank you. I'm pretty sure that our viewers would definitely have a lot of information that they appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you for having Jamie Lee. This is really nice, and I so appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Thank you.